Just let me know when you're ready, Genevieve.
Okay. Everything's settled in there. You ready to get started?
Sure.
Okay. So I'll just say welcome once again to everybody for online security and to keep the meeting really focused. We have limited what you can do as participants. However, you should be able to use the chat and also start your video should that be of interest to you. You are encouraged and welcome to put questions in the chat along through the meeting. Sometimes you might have a question and you want to get it out so you don't forget it. We are asking that you hold questions until the end. So using the chat is one way to go ahead and just make note of that question so you might not lose it. And thank you very much for coming tonight. Steve, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Genevieve. Good evening and welcome to Permit Sonoma's community outreach meeting regarding the Todd Creek Letter of Map Revision and Flood Insurance Study. My name is Steve Snow, the Floodplain Administrator for Sonoma County, and I'll be presenting this evening. Here with me in managing the Zoom meeting and the online questions is Genevieve Bartone, Permit Sonoma's Communication Program Manager, and Nathan Quarles, Permit Sonoma's Chief Building Official and Deputy Director of Engineering and Construction. If you have any questions during the course of the presentation, please hold them until the end when we will open the forum for questions. With that, I will begin the presentation. Before we dive into the presentation, I want to take a moment to define a few key terms and abbreviations so we're not getting lost in the jargon. The first term is LOMC, LOMA, and LOMR, which are all variations of flood map modifications, standing for letter of map change, amendment, or revision. This watershed-wide flood study is filed under a LOMR. The next term is FIS, which stands for Flood Insurance Study, which is the term for watershed-wide flood mapping studies. Next is FIRM, which stands for Flood Insurance Rate Map, which is the visual product of the flood insurance study and delineates the flood hazard area boundaries. BFE stands for Base Flood Elevation, and SFHA is short for Special Flood Hazard Area, which are the regulated areas at higher risk from flood damage. F1 is the county's zoning designation for floodways, and a floodway is the main flow channel of a waterway with the highest velocities and where the base flood is conveyed without increasing the base flood elevation. F2 is the county zoning designation for the 100-year floodplain or the flood fringe, which is the outside flood area of a channel with lower depths and velocities than the floodway. So the image you see now provides a good visual representation of the overall flood hazard area and how each category is defined. Note that the floodway and the floodplain are both inclusive within the special flood hazard area. So the history of the Todd Creek flood maps goes back over 10 years, with the first milestone in 2015 when FEMA produced the first preliminary maps for half of the watershed. Given that this was an incomplete study and inconsistent with recorded flood patterns, Sonoma County successfully appealed the flood insurance study, which forced FEMA to revise and update the study. In 2020, FEMA completed the restudy and published preliminary results, which accounted for the entire watershed, but used a different methodology for the second half, and then combined the two studies into one complete watershed study. Unfortunately, inconsistencies in FEMA's county contact information led the notice to be sent to the incorrect county department, which was a hard copy written notice right at the beginning of the pandemic, and that was missed because county staff were working from home at the time. Moving on to 2021, the COVID complications led the county to missing the appeal deadline, but FEMA still accepted the appeal as a comment, yet rejected the premise of the appeal. With the help from our political leaders, the release of the maps was able to be delayed until 2022 as the county explored options to restudy. The county initiated the process of assessing the mapping errors shortly following the map release and then requested proposals for contract engineering firms to prepare a revised flood insurance study via the LOMR process, ultimately selecting R&F Engineering out of Roseville in January 2023 and submitting the LOMR application in June of 2023 on June 30th. So after nearly 2 years of technical review iterations with FEMA, the maps were approved in June of this year, where a 90-day timeline was given for the county to send out public notices. These notices that you hopefully received were sent out in July to complete the last outstanding item from FEMA's review. Following confirmation of the notice, FEMA approved the LOMR application at the end of September and set dates for the appeal period and final effective map. In October, FEMA published notices of the map change, which commenced the 90-day appeal period, and that was on October 16th. So looking ahead, the appeal period will close on January 14th in 2026, which will start the 30-day review period for FEMA. If FEMA finds no valid appeals, the new maps will become effective on February 13th, and that will be the date that flood insurance requirements change with the new maps. The results of the study showed 964 parcels in the study area, with 675 of those not being impacted. That leaves 289 parcels with a change in their flood hazard designation, with the majority of those being removed from the flood hazard areas in some form or another. In total, 224 of those parcels have all or part of the flood hazard removed, while 63 parcels will be added to the flood hazard area, and 2 will have a mixed bag. You can see the summary in the table on the slide, which is also available on Permit Sonoma's website under the Todd Creek flood study page. To visualize the results, this image shows FEMA's original flood hazard area mapping for most of the watershed and then transitions to the county's mapping. Note that flood hazard areas were in blue in the first image and are yellow in the second image. You can see that much of the flood hazard areas have been scaled back and primarily limited to the creek channels. We will not be looking at or analyzing the flood mapping changes to individual parcels during this meeting. If you wish to see the flood mapping changes on your property, please look up the Todd Creek flood study page and maps on Permit Sonoma's website. While the flood mapping will be effective once adopted by FEMA, it's important to note that the corresponding zoning update for the flood hazard areas will follow later, and that's following approval from the Board of Supervisors. So what is the county doing? For the 65 parcels that have some form of flood hazard area added, the county is preparing the data to submit additional remapping applications as letters of map amendment, or LOMAs for short, to remove many of the structures for which the parcel has been added to the flood hazard area. There are 2 avenues for LOMAs to remove structures, which are mapped out as shown for structures clearly far from the 100-year floodplain, or F2 as the county zoning designation identifies it. And there's mapped out based on elevation, which can remove structures in or near the 100-year floodplain if the elevations show the adjacent grade to be above the base flood elevation. The elevations for these submittals must be certified by a licensed land surveyor, for which the county surveyor's office within Permit Sonoma will be supporting that effort. For these submittals, FEMA has indicated that applications must be submitted by individual property owners. So if they maintain that stance for the county's planned mass submittal, then the county will be preparing the application materials for the affected individual property owners to submit to FEMA directly. So an example image of an eligible mapped out is shown, applicable property is shown on this slide, and you can see that the structure is well outside of the newly mapped flood hazard area in yellow. Demonstrating this clear distance from the flood hazard area is typically sufficient for FEMA to remove the flood hazard area designation on a structure via a LOMA application. And the next one is an example image of a removed based on elevation applicable property, which is shown on this slide, where you can see that the structure is very close to the newly mapped flood hazard area in yellow. Demonstrating the adjacent grade around the structure is above the base flood elevation is typically sufficient for FEMA to remove the flood hazard area designation on a structure via a LOMA application. So impacts of this study for those added to the flood hazard area include the need for flood insurance for structures under federally backed loans. These properties added to the flood hazard area will also be subject to stricter flood hazard area development standards for any new construction or substantial improvements to existing structures. For properties removed from the flood hazard area, the requirement for flood insurance will be relieved and the stricter development standards will no longer apply. While the county does not deal in flood insurance, rate increases occur regardless of mapping updates. Flood insurance rates increase based on relative flood risk and increasing liability and claims. While rates typically increase, you can take measures to reduce your risk and rates by elevating and or flood proofing your structure, which the county's Community Development Commission has a flood elevation mitigation program that can help with funding for eligible structures. So if you disagree with the new maps, you can submit a formal appeal. Appeals must be supported by data and documentation that shows the new maps and data are scientifically or technically incorrect. This supporting data must demonstrate better methodologies, assumptions, or data, and provide alternative analysis or data that can be used to develop new maps and flood insurance studies. It is important to highlight that anecdotes of no observed flooding are not considered valid appeals by FEMA. If you want to submit an appeal, FEMA wants those sent to the local agency, Permit Sonoma, where we will compile them and submit all appeals and comments together. After review of the appeals and or comments, FEMA will provide a formal response to the county and the original appellants. If valid appeals are submitted, FEMA will revise the maps and the studies based on the data and provide copies of these materials with the appeal resolution letter to the county and each appellant. So this page contains multiple helpful links to find more information on submitting appeals, the maps and history of the study, as well as the county's flood hazard area development regulations. We'll make these links and materials available following the meeting. That concludes the presentation. Thank you for your time. Nathan, do you have any closing remarks you'd like to add? Otherwise, we can open the forum to the audience. All right, Nathan says we're ready to open to the audience. Do we have any questions online, Genevieve? Hearing none, but we'll wait for a little bit.
Steve, are you ready for questions here?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. Christine and I were conferring on the lighting in the room. Okay, so question in the chat says, I'm confused on what parts of Santa Rosa are within the watershed. This person lives in the Copperfield neighborhood near College and Fulton. And if they look up the maps provided, they don't show at all in the floodplain. Does that mean that they aren't affected or they're just not in this area?
I'm not 100% familiar with that exact location, but I believe that's outside of the study area. So I don't think that's impacted by this study or the flood maps that the county has generated here from Todd Creek. That might be the Santa Rosa Creek flood study that they're getting notices for.
Oh, okay. That's a great distinction. They did just have a very similar process that was for the Santa Rosa Creek. So is there a place that they could look up their address in our maps, or is it just the slider and zoom in?
I mean, it depends if that's city or county address. For city, we don't necessarily show all the flood hazard areas within the city, but they could still look it up. It has that search function, but it'd probably be better to reference the city's materials that they release for Santa Rosa Creek with their preliminary flood map release. They do, but I don't have it on hand. I can, following the meeting, put it in the materials we provide for Santa Rosa Creek.
Thank you.
Oh, you mean from the chat? Yeah. If they want to put the location in the chat, we can look it up and provide a response.
Okay, great. Amara, if you'd like to put your address in the chat, they'd be able to provide you a little customized advice there. The next question in the chat is, if an entire HOA in the new flood area, does the county have if an entire HOA is in the new flood area, does the county have a plan, or will the county help this HOA with mitigation or other processes? The HOA in question is on the west edge of Sebastopol.
Again, this sounds like it's not in the study area for Todd Creek. Sebastopol, that's more Laguna de Santa Rosa flood hazard area. But for the impacted parcels from this study, the county is planning to support LOMA applications for impacted parcels that are eligible to be able to be at least have their structures removed from the flood hazard area designation, relieving the need for flood insurance.
Hey, Genevieve, can the audience hear me?
Roughly, you're a little bit distant, but yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so
You wanna-
I'm just gonna offer, if those clients wanna shoot us an email, we can look into it tomorrow. But Steve's right, if it's out by Sebastopol, it's outside the Todd Creek letter of map revision. But we can certainly see what we can do to help with.
Okay, he clarified that the HOA is in the Green Valley watershed at Tuscadero Creek.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't believe that has been studied recently or restudied at all. Maybe an eligible candidate in the future, because I believe, at least as I recall, that's all a zone A with unidentified base flood elevations. Given that, it might be a candidate to be studied in the future to get more detailed base flood elevations.
Okay. I don't see any further questions in the chat. I did want to acknowledge that we had some folks, we had another one pop in. I'll address in a second. We did have some folks join us late, and I wanted to let you know that we just completed our brief presentation. It was recorded and it will be posted to our website. And we're currently in the question and answer portion of our presentation. And the next question is, the FEMA map showed us in the flood zone. The new map doesn't. We're near Cotati Creek. What does this mean for them, I think, is the implied question.
If they were shown in the flood hazard area before and they're not in now, that means that they'll no longer be subject to flood insurance requirements and floodplain development requirements for any new construction or substantial improvements they want to pursue on their property.
Thank you. Do we have other questions? Oh, here, another one. Okay, Amara has given me her address. I'll bring that in on a post-it note for you. And she would like as more specifics as possible. So let me bring that over for you. Other questions?
It looks like we got another one from Daniel Decay.
Great. Sorry. Okay, Daniel says the new map seems to show us the HOA in a flood area. Previously, we were listed outside of the 100-year flood zone. I think the question is, again, what does that mean for us? Is the implication there? Feel free to clarify.
I don't believe that. Sorry, finish up, Genevieve.
I'm just going to say the participants do have the ability to unmute themselves, and you're welcome to clarify your questions verbally if that's helpful. So I'll just repeat that question. The new map seems to show us the HOA in a flood area. Previously, we were listed outside of the flood zone. So Daniel, are you asking what this means for you as an HOA, or can you clarify the question for Steve, please? Host is not allowed to unmute ourselves, so you should be allowed to unmute yourselves. There you go. I apologize. You should be now.
Okay, yes, my question is the new map, when we took a look at it just this morning, seems to place us underwater, and the old maps didn't do. And I'm wondering if we're considered part of this study or if we're just ancillary to the whole process. I'm on the board of an HOA here and a little concerned about what we might be looking at.
Can you help dial us into your location there, Daniel?
Valley View Court on the Tuscadero Creek, just before Water Trough on Bodega Highway.
You mentioned Atascadero Creek, so that is not part of this flood study that the county conducted. That would have been one that pre-existed. FEMA studied it at one point. What we can do, given that it's outside this study area, we're not terribly familiar with it at the moment, so we can.
Nathan, can you please have speak closer to the microphone? Daniel, were you able to hear Nathan?
No, I was having a hard time hearing that reply.
So the Atascadero Creek watershed and the Green Valley Creek watershed is outside the Todd Creek flood study area. And we're not really prepared to answer questions about that watershed at the moment. My recommendation is that you email us with an address and we can look it up tomorrow and get back to you.
But our understanding is that nothing has changed in that watershed in terms of flood mapping.
Great. Thank you both for your response. I'll send an email in the morning. Appreciate it very much.
Yep, no problem.
I'll put both their emails in the chat. And we have one other question. I think it's again from the individual that was shown in the flood map and now is no longer in the flood zone. They said, how can they inform their mortgage company that they no longer need flood insurance?
My understanding from my dealings with folks who have had to go through this route to alleviate themselves of the need for flood insurance, it depends on the mortgage company of what kind of documentation they'll accept. It could be written flood zone determination from our office. It could be just an image of the new map, and then with your property identified, showing it clearly outside of the flood hazard area. That could be sufficient. We can prepare screenshots to get a more localized view than the flood insurance rate maps may provide. So those are all options that you can pursue that at least work on some level or another with differing mortgage companies, depending on what their documentation requirements are.
Thank you. We also just had a couple of people just join us, so I'll catch them up a little bit. We had a brief, approximately 15-minute presentation, and then now we're in the question and answers. Once we get everyone's questions answered, Steve, would you be willing to give an abbreviated review of the presentation just so they can see what they missed? We did record the presentation and we will post it to our website.
Sure.
Are there any other questions from the folks who have seen the presentation and were able to hear the questions that have been asked so far?
I do have a response for the first, not caller, but first attendee, that question about, I'm not going to give the whole address, but that's in the city of Santa Rosa. And I think you're probably going to be subject to the city's flood insurance study. And they're doing a similar process. They're a little bit behind us in timeline. They just recently submitted the technical documents to FEMA for their review, and their public comment period is going to be starting sometime in 2026.
And they have a really robust website that I'll put in the chat for you. Any other questions before Steve gives an abbreviated or kind of quicker presentation, round two, for the latecomers? I see Ed's iPhone. You're unmuted. Do you have a question?
Yeah, in 2015 and 16, I went through the process of getting a determination to remove my property out of the flood zone, and I spent thousands and thousands of dollars with civil engineering, and it was proven to not be in the flood zone. And then now I'm finding myself back in the flood zone. I'm not sure why.
So are you in the Todd Creek vicinity, the watershed?
To be honest with you, I'm just finding out about this meeting. That's why I'm joining so late. But I'm over off of Colgan Avenue on the east side of 101. And I'm just trying to get caught up in regards to two things. Why is the city of Santa Rosa doing a separate water study and the county why aren't we doing a joint study? Because it's very apparent that the FEMA maps were wrong 10 years ago and they're still wrong today.
they're two separate watersheds, and the city didn't have any vested interest in pursuing a study for Todd Creek because that's outside of their jurisdiction. So that's why it's separate. We did collaborate with them for the Santa Rosa Creek study. So it's not like we're operating in silos, but we try to communicate and work together as best we can. They are separate watersheds, separate jurisdictions. So that's the dividing line there. As to why it's added, there's a lot of technical analysis that goes into that. Ultimately, I don't want to get too into the technical details, but these studies perform a hydrology analysis to determine the amount of water that's coming down these creeks. And then they model it to see, based on how much water is coming down, how high up that water is going to reach and the extent of where the boundary of where that water reaches. And that's ultimately a very simplified version of how flood zones are determined. So it's a technical analysis using current methodologies and modeling software to determine these boundaries. And we did use local data of local storm drains. We took local surveys, doing field reconnaissance to make sure that we had all the applicable infrastructure accounted for to properly account for where the water is going and have that mapped as accurately as possible. You want to add anything, Nathan?
No, but I'd make an offer. If you're willing to share your address or parcel number, we could look it up real quick and see, give you our opinion on whether you're in or out and what could be done.
And there's been a couple of properties on Colgan Avenue that have been removed out of the FEMA map in previous years. And so I'm not sure why we're back in. I did get a notice from the city of Santa Rosa, and I've been working with the city of Santa Rosa in regards to that. But it just seems like you get stuck in these situations and you gotta spend thousands of dollars to prove the map wrong and here we go again. We're back in the same saddle where we have to keep proving the maps to be incorrect. It even says on the FEMA maps, if I'm not mistaken, there's a variance up to 4 feet on some of the maps that are on the FEMA website.
Yeah, so we're looking at our GIS resource that we have online with the slider tool. And it looks like that parcel is being removed from the floodplain.
It already has been removed. It was removed in
Right.
2017.
I understand that, but when FEMA came through with their study, they restudied the whole watershed, and if you had filed a local, like a LOMA for your parcel,
I
their
did.
bigger project overrode that, but our project is overriding their work. So I know it's,
And where our project is in line with your findings, correct, Nathan?
Yes.
yeah, I'm looking at our slider tool right now.
Yeah, ours shows this property being removed.
And I have all the paperwork saying it's been removed, but I also been noticed by the city of Santa Rosa that it's now back in, and I brought all my paperwork down there and they're working through it. But the only issue is that once you get into this cycle, your lender mandates flood insurance until items are resolved, and it's not cheap for commercial buildings. I was quoted $25,000 a year for flood insurance.
Right. Yeah, I can't speak to the cost, but that does seem excessive to me, but our work indicates that parcel will be taken out of FEMA's floodplain once our letter of map revision is finally approved by FEMA.
That's reassuring. Thank you guys for the time, and I appreciate you letting me speak.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so Daniel, your question is, the new map seems to show us in the HO in a flood area. Previously, you were outside of it. Daniel, have you given us, maybe if you're willing to either give me a personal message with your address, we can make sure that you're in this study that we're looking at here. And you're also welcome to unmute yourself if you're in a space that you can do that. Because I think we had determined that the HOA is not in this current flood study, in the Todd Creek flood study, since you're on the west of Sebastopol.
I appreciate this. Just wanted to be clear that the new map, that I understand the new map as well as possible. And I'll mute myself again.
No problem. Thanks for being here and for the conversation. And the website that for the flood study that we're currently working on, it's the Todd Creek flood study. And I did put that website in the chat. And then we have a slider that shows that project's area.
So Genevieve, I do need to retract and make a correction for the gentleman on Colgan Avenue. So that is in the city of Santa Rosa and flows to Colgan Creek. And that was not in our Todd Creek flood study. So the comments I made earlier about being out and using the slider tool, that does not apply to this parcel. Our slider tool just shows the before and after. It does pick up some of the watersheds, but if you were to zoom out, the after takes all of the Russian River out. It's just a function of how we built this. They should only be using the slider tool for the Todd Creek watershed.
So if they're outside of the Todd Creek, it'll look like they're outside of the study, but it's really because they're not under our jurisdiction.
It's because they're outside the Todd Creek watershed.
I'm sorry, the jurisdiction of the study, correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
so any locations that are in a different watershed or jurisdiction, just based on how the mapping was produced, will show as outside or being removed. But that's just because the new map only shows the changed areas under the study. It doesn't account for existing areas to remain in other watersheds that weren't studied. So just as a point of clarification.
And so if they're outside of this study, does that, if specifically for that address, does that mean that they're still in our jurisdiction, but not in this study, or are they in the Santa Rosa jurisdiction?
Going back to the one on Colgan, that is in the city of Santa Rosa.
Okay.
So that's not the county's jurisdiction.
Okay.
You want to add anything?
So the question I have then would be, is it true that FEMA uses aerial mapping and for topo, and that basically it's a WAG versus our actual certified civil drawings that actually have elevations, hubs, and control points? So what would be the determining factor on the documents? We would use the certified copy of the civil engineer as precedence, or does FEMA just rely on their aerial topos?
When they're generating the studies and the flood models, the elevation data they use, I believe, is based on LiDAR.
Yes.
So obviously it's not exact, especially on super localized scales, which is where a local survey is going to be much more precise. But if you're trying to contest that and apply for a LOMA, a letter of map amendment, to map your property outside of the flood hazard area, then yes, you would be using that localized data from a civil engineer or licensed land surveyor that shows your either adjacent grade is above the base flood elevation, or that your structure is far removed from the flood hazard area boundary, one or the other.
So
Correct. I was already granted a LOMA, and now they're trying to put me back in and overturn the LOMA.
Yes,
So, which makes no sense.
I understand that. And what I would do is I would take a look at your elevation certificate and the topos and the elevations that your engineer had conducted for you, and then compare that to Santa Rosa's new study. It may be that, again, your lowest adjacent grade is higher than the flood, and you'll have to reapply to FEMA to get it removed again.
That makes no sense.
You should be able to reuse that same data. So
Exactly.
reaffirming it.
I'm not.
They sometimes do that automatically too.
I'm not saying your explanation makes no sense. I'm trying to say FEMA is relying on maps that are not accurate, and they're causing the public to incur a significant amount of expense to prove their innocence,
Correct.
which is
I
totally
agree with
doesn't make sense.
No, that part doesn't make sense. I understand that. But they're looking at it from a broader perspective, a watershed-wide perspective. The LiDAR is not inaccurate. It's pretty accurate, but they should have picked up on the fact that you had a LOMA on file, and they should have evaluated it, but they don't look at that granularity when they're doing these watershed-wide studies.
And just for clarification, we're talking 3/4 of an inch. between being in and out.
All right, I'll make an offer for you. If you want to email me or give me a call tomorrow, I would be interested in reviewing your elevation certificate and the survey your engineer did, and then we can compare it to the city study and see what they're saying. And then I can help advise you. It's not our jurisdiction. I can't help you out formally, but I can walk you through the process and at least have another set of eyes looking at your information.
That would be
Yeah.
great. That would be great.
Also, when the city's study goes into the appeal period, that would be valid data submittal to submit as an appeal, showing that your elevation's already above the base flood for them to incorporate into the study and make sure that doesn't map you in, because that's still really early on in the process. You have that opportunity once the study gets to that point.
Yeah, that's great. Can I, by chance, get the name and email address?
I re-put it in the chat for you, Ed. It's there again.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
So I think, have addressed all of the questions from our original cohort of attendees. Are there people here that would like Steve to do a quick overview of the presentation he gave before some of you were able to be here? Is that of interest to you all, or did you get the information you need? We've also recorded the presentation. It will be posted to our website. I can email everybody who attended a link so that you don't miss it. Please let me know if you would like Steve to give a quick overview of the presentation that we gave at 6 p.m. Okay, I'm not seeing any requests for a redo. Are there any other questions? Okay, the sliding tool is on the website and I put that above. I can do that again. And it doesn't look like a map right when you get to it. It's a link that you click. And
Yeah, you got to open the link, and that takes you to the map. And I believe there is a button you have to click to activate the slider.
I'll
But
show,
there are instructions on the map that say how to do that.
yeah, I'll show you real quick. I'm going to replace your current share, Steve, with my screen. Oh, screen 2. Share. Okay, I'm sharing, I think, the Todd Creek website. Is that what you all see, Steve?
Yep, that's right.
Great. You can just get this little black bar that's right in my way out of the
It
way.
looks like we are seeing your full screen rather than just the specific window, though, just FYI.
Yeah, thank you. No problem. You mean all of my other tabs? No problem. Okay, so this is the website. This is our Todd Creek website. It talks a little bit about the process and the results. And here's the chart that Steve had in his presentation. Here's the summary report. And did I already pass the slider, Steve? Yeah, here it
think
is.
so.
Where is the slider? I remember it being hard to see. That's why I mentioned this.
I think it's below the table. Yeah.
Interactive map. I'll hide, GIS study mapping tool here. Maybe we can bring that up or something. So here's the interactive map for those of you. I knew it was hard to find because I had a hard time finding it before. And Steve, if you want to share your screen and go to this so that you can walk people through, that's an option. I just wanted people to see it. So for that, like I said, for the reason I mentioned earlier, and not everybody's familiar with GIS. And so this can be a little bit clunky for folks.
You're already there if you want to do it, but if you want me to, I can also.
Oh, so here's the instructions. Let me see if I can do it. I've never done it. What's the slider? Tell me where the slider is.
Top left, the second from the left button.
Okay, so this is the slider here.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then you click and drag. So the yellow layers are the new layers that the county generated with our study. where the blue is all the former layers. But as we mentioned before, the former layers shows all flood hazard areas, where the new map only shows the changed ones for Todd Creek. So just to clarify.
Can you say that one more time?
So the old map, which is on the right side of the slider, shows all the existing flood hazard areas in blue everywhere for the county. On the left side of the slider, it shows the new flood hazard areas for the Todd Creek study, only the Todd Creek watershed study. So it appears that other areas are being removed, but that's just a function of the GIS mapping. Those areas just weren't included in the second half of the map, but their flood hazard areas are unaffected.
It basically takes away all of FEMA's flood maps and leaves the county's flood map. We assume people would be focused in on Todd Creek, but if you were to zoom out and play with a slider, you would notice that all the floodplains for the Russian River go away, which is not the intent.
That's this here.
Yeah, the on and off is, it turns off all of FEMA's layers and turns on the county layer.
Yeah, so that's just a limitation of our GIS mapping tools.
That was a good exercise. Are there any other questions about the slider? About the website or anything you've learned here?
The slider does have a search function where you can put in a specific address too.
Oh, sure, I'll show them that. Thank you, Steve. Here.
Yeah, that bar in the top left.
Not in the Todd Creek study, but
Yeah.
it took us right there. And I think that was, we did have a person on the
Yeah,
west
it was
side.
more at inquiries.
So there's that address, and there's the FEMA original flood maps. But we're just looking at this piece here. That's the piece we're studying. Any questions about this or anything else you want to mention, Steve or Nathan, about the slider?
Nothing else to add.
Thank
Nathan?
you.
Yeah, just the search bar for the address or parcel number, that is only going to work if it's a county address or parcel.
Thank you.
Yeah, for those folks who are in the city of Santa Rosa, that probably won't pull up their location.
Okay.
One further question, if I may. This is Daniel.
Hello.
You said just a minute ago that if you move the slider all the way across, that shows the FEMA maps. Are these the, what year are those FEMA maps that you're referring to? Are those the most recent ones?
It depends on which area that we're talking about. So the ones for Todd Creek were released by FEMA in 2022. The counties are expected to be published in 2026, but other areas throughout the county were mapped at various different times over the last 20 plus years. A lot of areas in the counties were mapped in 2008, but there were also updates in 2012, 2014, 2017, 2020, and 2022, and again in 2024. Pretty consistently updating. It just depends on the location, what date your area was mapped.
Okay, great. Thanks, Steve.
Yep.
Just going to give it a few seconds here while people think about everything we've learned here tonight. If there's any further questions, I'm going to put everything in the chat again, which is both Steve and Nathan's emails, their contact information. They very graciously offered to help you, even if you're outside of our flood study, and also our website, as well as the Santa Rosa Creek study, in case that is, you fall into that area. Otherwise, I just want to thank Steve and Nathan for all of their hard work on this flood study and for being very available to continue to help. I've added both websites and their emails in the chat. Make sure you grab those. As I said, we will be posting this recording to our website, and I will email all of those that have attended a link to that so that even if you forget, it'll come into your inbox. And we're just really grateful for the conversation tonight. We appreciate your attendance. And if there are no
Well, I
further
also wanna
questions, yeah. Oh, please
Thank
go
you,
ahead, Steve.
Genevieve, for your support in moderating tonight. Thanks.
My pleasure. All right, we look forward to seeing you all again. You have our contact information. Please don't hesitate to reach out, okay? Thank you, everybody. Have
Thanks,
a great
everyone.
night. Thank you. Bye-bye.